Hi grade 5. Today we're going to finish reading our story in the literature anthology textbook, Camping with the President. So here's where we stopped on page 54. When Roosevelt woke up the next morning, he recognized the wonderful music of a hermit thrush, one of his favorite birds. The President was starving. He wrestled the fry pan from Charlie. Before long, bacon-scented smoke drifted into the forest. Then the President scrambled 6 eggs beside the slab of bacon. He ate a huge breakfast, happy to be away from the White House cooks who fussed over his diet. After nibbling on a crust of bread, John Muir picked up a sequoia cone. He shook it. Dark, tiny seeds, much smaller than snowflakes, spilled out. Muir explained that from just one seed, the grizzly giant had sprouted about 2,000 years earlier. Other trees in the grove were almost as old. Many were hundreds of years old. Sequoias, Muir added, grew on the western slopes of the Sierra Nevada, but nowhere else in the entire world. Roosevelt's eyes widened with surprise. So why is the president surprised here? Because he learns how old and rare sequoia trees are. Okay, he says that these are the seeds of a sequoia cone, all right, and one of the seeds that fell 2,000 years ago turned into the grizzly giant tree. Moments later, Muir scrambled up a nearby sequoia tree stump like a mountain goat. He is pretty spry for a 65-year-old, Roosevelt thought. The stump's flat top was big enough to hold a dozen men or more. Muir yelled that it had taken several days to saw down this tree. When it crashed to the ground, the tree shattered into splinters. Sequoia wood was of little use, except for fence posts. But lumbermen still continued to cut these trees. The president shook his head in disgust. How could anyone cut a tree that had been growing for so long? For fence posts? What if future generations never saw a giant sequoia tree? He and Mr. Muir would have to chat about forest preservation, but later. It was time to go. Roosevelt swallowed one last cup of coffee, strong and hot, just the way he liked it. Okay, so here Roosevelt uses the phrase, or he thinks that John Muir is pretty spry for a 65-year-old. What does this mean? This shows us, number one, guys, that it shows us his actual age, all right, and also what he is like. So not only is he more active than most people his age, he is still taking an interest in the future of the wilderness. Here we have an example of a homograph on page 55, all right, such as the word posts. Again, guys, homographs are words that have the same spelling but different meanings. So here it's used as a noun. Posts means pieces of wood fixed firmly in the ground, but it can also mean military bases. All right, used as a verb, to post means to mail or to publish. So we can use context clues to help us figure out the meaning of homographs. On page 55 here, guys, we also can tell that President Roosevelt respects the great sequoias, and he's very upset at the idea that they might not be there for future generations to see. The horse snorted and danced sideways along the trail. The president looked back. No one seemed to be following him. Had he truly escaped the ever-watchful eyes of his Secret Service men? Hours later, the two men arrived at Glacier Point with its spectacular views. Swirling wind tried to take the president's hat as Roosevelt and Muir inched out onto overhanging rock at the tip of Glacier Point. Yosemite Valley lay 3,000 feet directly below them. The Merced River, a curving ribbon of gray-blue, flowed through the green valley floor. Rock walls, interspersed with waterfalls, ringed the valley. Muir pointed out Upper and Lower Yosemite Falls with mist rising from below, and the sheer face of Half Dome. The rugged-looking high mountain country stretched beyond. For a change, Roosevelt was speechless. Suddenly, reporters appeared, interrupting with questions and calls of "Mr. President, Mr. President!" The wind picked up their words and blew them away. The president's jaws snapped shut. Where had they come from? So, the reporters suddenly appeared and they interrupted him, right? Once he figures out that the reporters have followed him, he snaps his jaw shut. There's a metaphor here, guys, a curving ribbon of gray-blue. This describes the Merced River as it is flowing through the valley floor. Okay. Once again, people and cameras surrounded him. The president was angry, very angry. He marched to his horse. "Boys, keep them away from me," Roosevelt barked at the Secret Service, glad for once that they were lurking nearby. How could he rough it with a crowd around him? At sunset, Roosevelt and Muir picked a new camping spot. The president grabbed an axe and insisted on starting the fire. Sweat flew from his forehead as he chopped firewood. Before long, a sizzling hot campfire glowed in the dark, and once again Roosevelt took the fry pan from Charlie. While the president chewed his way through a platter of steak and fried potatoes, Muir spoke of the need to provide government protection around every wild grove and forest on the mountains. He urged Roosevelt to set aside land, including the Mariposa Grove of big trees and the state-run Yosemite Valley, which they would visit the next day. The president had never met anyone who talked as much or as fast about the importance of nature. In fact, Muir seemed to live on words, not food. As Roosevelt listened, he heard a noise in the trees above him. Was it a dreaded Secret Service man guarding him in a tree? He listened again. Then he chuckled. In his notebook, the president wrote "owl." Okay, so the president here said that he wanted to rough it. All right, by the phrase rough it, he means that he wanted to be out in nature without the usual comforts or conveniences that come with being the president. Okay, narrative nonfiction tells us about real events and usually puts them in chronological time order. So to help follow the order of events, we look for these signal words and phrases. Some of these on pages 56 and 57 include hours later, suddenly, once again, at sunset, before long, while, the next day, as Roosevelt listened, and then. Alright, 4 to 5 inches of snow covered them by morning. This is bullier yet. Remember what we said bully means? This is, when something is bully, it is amazing. "I wouldn't miss this for anything," the president shouted, shaking snow from his blankets. He shaved by the light of a roaring campfire, then trimmed and waxed his mustache. That morning they followed a narrow trail that hugged the vertical granite walls. It was late afternoon when the small dust-coated group rode into Yosemite Village, a cluster of tents and wooden buildings. A waiting crowd cheered loudly and pressed forward, hoping to shake the president's hand. He dismounted. "Mr. Muir and I slept in a snowstorm last night. This has just been the grandest day of my life, one I shall long remember. Just think of where I was last night, up there," and with a sweep of his hand he pointed to Glacier Point, "amid the pines and silver firs, and without a tent." The president waved his hat. "Now Mr. Muir and I will pitch camp near Bridal Veil Fall." He mounted his horse. It reared suddenly, legs pawing the air. Charlie stepped forward to push back the throng. Tails swishing, the pack animals stood at the edge of the campsite. The air turned chilly after the sunset. Suddenly a mule brayed. Twigs snapped. Suspecting that they had been followed, Charlie disappeared into the dark. He told hundreds of waiting admirers in a nearby meadow to leave because the president was very tired. They went, some of them even on tiptoe, so as not to annoy their president, he later told Roosevelt. As the moon came up, the president took off his shoes and rolled up his pant legs. Wading in the icy-cold stream, Roosevelt hollered to John Muir. He was as happy as a boy out of school. All right, so why do you think Roosevelt is so happy? It says he was as happy as a boy out of school. So we know that he really is enjoying his experience at Yosemite, and he's very happy to get away from the press. Then the two men lay on their mattresses of ferns and fir branches, still talking about the waste of natural resources. For once, the president mostly listened. He respected the mountaineers' advice on the importance of preserving land around the entire country. Above them, El Capitan glowed in the nighttime light. The Merced River flowed softly. Bridal Veil Fall thundered, and it was growing late. The president was tired. "Good night, boys," he said. He burrowed under his blankets and fell asleep. For the third night in a row he snored. Too soon, though, sunlight streamed into the valley. The president's horse-drawn stagecoach brought his official party. "It was bully," the president said, pumping John Muir's hand. "I've had the time of my life." Roosevelt climbed into his stagecoach and leaned over. "Goodbye, John. Come and see me in Washington." Then he motioned John to come closer. "Be patient. Congress may sleep through my long-winded speeches, but I promise to wake them up." What a magical place, Roosevelt thought, gazing around one last time. He was glad he had come to Yosemite. He felt more alive than ever, thanks to his bully good camping trip with John Muir. Once back in Washington, Roosevelt would be able to do some forest good, as the old naturalist would say. Roosevelt peered in every direction as his stagecoach circled the valley. He wanted to savor his memories of Half Dome, of sunlight washing over glacial rocks, Yosemite Falls roaring, of deer grazing, and the lingering smell of a Yosemite campfire. Then he waved one final goodbye. The president was gone in a cloud of dust. Okay, so Roosevelt here mentions his work with Congress, all right, and he says he promises to wake them up. By saying this, Roosevelt is promising to make Congress pay attention to what he has to say about land preservation. All right, John Muir's ideas definitely affect the president, all right, and they make him understand the importance of saving and preserving natural resources. All right, that's it, guys, for today's story. If you have any questions, please let me know for this week's story. Actually, sorry. You have a quiz on Sunday. It will be online, just like your last quiz. So be sure to study and check Smart Schools over the weekend. And I will meet you guys soon. Take care, guys.